Hey, what's happening, everybody? Dwayne with Off Grid. It's been about a month and just been super busy. So that brings me to the point. What do I think are the best processes, welding processes for homesteading or living off grid or doing working on a farm outdoors? Well, there's actually two. Now, if you were on a very tight budget and you couldn't afford a machine, or you didn't have a lot of money, I would say stick welding could get you by, but it's going to be more expensive in the long run because you waste a lot of material with stick welding. But also, stick is not the easiest process to learn. So, unless you really have practiced stick welding, it's probably not going to do you any good. Because you're going to be spending more time doing crappy welds than you are actually getting anything done. So that's the problem with stick welding. I like stick because I can use it. One of the main advantages of stick welding is that number one, you get really good penetration with it. So if you're welding like thicker metals, it's really good for that, especially when you're welding outdoors because it has a shielding gas built in. The shielding is built into the stick. So basically, you don't have to worry about the wind affecting your welds because the wind's your enemy. If you have like MIG welding or TIG, those two are going to require shielding gases, and the problems with those is they're very difficult to weld outdoors. If the wind's blowing, you really have to have a setup to do that. So it's really hard to do those processes outdoors, so they're not really fitted for this type of lifestyle unless you have a shop. So most of the work that I'm doing, if I'm repairing a tractor, for example, well, there's where stick would come into play, or flux core, because those I can do outside. And also, one of the advantages of stick welding is you can pull different types of electrodes for different types of situations. They have all kinds of different kinds, and you can switch them out immediately. Instead of like if you have a wire feed machine, which I'm going to show you here in a minute, that wire feed machine is going to have whatever spool you have in it. And in order to change that out, that's a little bit of a process. So, it could take you 10 minutes to do that. And if you got to keep switching out, you're better off just almost buying multiple machines for that because it's going to be a pain in the neck. Whereas with stick, if I can, if I want to go to a deep penetrating electrode like a 6010, when they all have numbers, I'm not going to go into that here. There's lots of info on that out there. People explain it better than me, but you got different numbers on your electrodes. So 6010 would be like your deep root pass for like thicker metal, and then you'll have your top pass of a 7018, which will be the nice weld on top that kind of caps it off. So if you have a dirtier metal, they have electrodes for that. So it's nice with stick. The biggest problem is that if you don't know how to weld stick, it's probably worthless to you. So here's the one I think I would do if I were new at welding and I wanted to get into welding. And this is the type I still use out here because it's just so damn convenient, and that is flux core. Now, flux core is, it's like flux core. It has flux built into the wire. Okay, so when you're feeding the wire out of your machine, that wire is going to feed through your machine and it's going to come out the nozzle, and I'm not going to have to worry about a shielding gas. So, like for example, I'm out here in the middle of the high desert. We get lots of winds out here. It's windy all freaking day. I can weld outdoor with flux core and not worry about the gas protecting my weld blowing away. And so it's really fitted for outdoor. Also, you get really good penetration with flux core. You get higher deposition rates than you do with, say, MIG. So for me, I think flux core, if I were a newbie, I would go directly to flux core. And I think most do because it's probably, I would say, the easiest to pick up. It's the easiest to pick up and run with, but it's not so easy to be good at it, if that makes sense. It's kind of like drywall. It's easy to hang drywall, but it's not real easy to master doing a really nice drywall job, if that makes sense. That's how I would compare flux core. Because one thing about any type of welding is that your welds can look really pretty on the surface, but if you don't have any penetration in that weld, if you got slag inclusion from flux core, that's something you got to worry about with flux is, slag inclusion. If you're not doing your process right, your welds are not going to be very strong, and you may not even know it until that weld fails. So for that, I don't always look for the prettiest looking weld when I'm doing flux core. I look for, am I getting proper penetration? Do I have my machine settings dialed in for the thickness of metal that I'm using? Is the material clean? So I'm gonna, and I could go into all kinds of details that are not really just going to be outside the scope of this video. So anyhow, I'll show you the machines, the setup that I use here, and then we'll probably end this video today and get back to work. Okay, so this is a machine that I use. It's not a super expensive one. It does the job. I've been welding for a long time, so I can get away with using these machines no problem. A lot of guys will talk about, you need to get the super expensive Millers or the Lincolns, and you just don't. Honestly, I've used them all. I've used the nice Millers. I've used $20,000 machines, and I've used $400 machines. And yeah, there are some to stay away from, but honestly, if they have enough ratings on them, they're probably good to go for the type of welding you're probably going to be doing. Expensive. I mean, you can get a decent machine for probably $400, and then your gear that you're going to need, your helmet, your gloves. Where I probably would spend the most is on your actual welding wire itself. So you can see how the machine's set up. I open the case here, and there's my wire inside there. Okay. And this is Victory Welding Alloys. These guys have really good stuff. This is, it's probably not the cheapest wire, but it's good stuff. And the numbers here matter. I'm not going to go into those right now, but this is the type I use for more structural welding, like smaller scale. But the 11 at the end versus the GS is better. It's a little harder to find, but this is it's just better quality. And you're going to see this 71T-11 or 71T-GS. Those are the two commons for flux core welding. The wire size is another thing. The two common ones you're going to see for backyard welding and stuff is going to be, the .030 wire or the .035 wire. Now, the .035 is what I usually use the most here, although they do have bigger wire, a lot bigger wire that you can use, and that's where you start getting into structural welding and, welding super thick stuff at really high amperage and stuff, and this machine's just not going to be able to do that. So this machine's only going to go up to 205 amps, I think. Quarter-inch steel is probably the best, the max for this machine. So you're not going to go above quarter-inch with this thing, which is fine. I don't actually have to do anything above quarter-inch out here, and if I do, I just go to my stick welding for that. That would be like a repair on my tractor or something. So with this machine here, I can do just about any type of welding I need to do. I built my pergola with this machine. I've built just hundreds of things with using this size wire and this size of a machine. The different spools they'll have, you'll have your 10-pound spool, you got your 2-pound or your 1-pound, which are tiny, but I usually will go with the 10-pound and I'll keep it in here. The only thing that's a pain in the ass with these is if I will sometimes switch out to .030, and I will do that when I'm going with like a thinner metal. So when I'm trying to weld something a little thinner, the .030 wire is going to be better for that. And I would have to change out this whole machine. And actually, the best bet, I actually have another machine sitting in there. I probably just should set that thing up, and I just haven't done it. But basically, at that point, if you're going to keep switching back and forth, you would just be better off having two machines, honestly, especially if you're doing any type of work for money. So yeah, this is the machine. And then, of course, you got your gun. You got your ground here, and this is what you're going to attach to your workpiece. You got to make sure your piece is clean, and a good ground is key. And then, of course, you got your wire. And this is your nozzle, your trigger, whatever you want to call it. I have a flux core tip on here. This is a different type of nozzle where I have the consumable here, the tip sticking out of the piece that usually will cover it. With MIG, you won't see this sticking out. You'll just see the wire sticking out, but this is more for flux core. So I can go into a lot of different things with welding, but the reality of it is it's just way outside the scope of this one video. You know, because you start talking about travel angle, work angle, travel speed, wire speed, amperage, voltage, wire types, metal types. Like I said, way outside the scope of this. And so, you know, I'm not really here to try to teach you how to weld, but I will say this simply: if you are going to weld or learn to weld outside, you know, for homesteading purposes, I think your best bet would be to go with the flux core machine. And honestly, Harbor Freight, my first machine was a Harbor Freight, like Chicago Electric, and I did fine with it. You know, I went to school to weld, and actually, you know, in the school, the booths, they had all the super nice Miller machines that were really high end, and the Lincolns, and they were like $20,000 machines. So they were really good machines, and I welded with those, and I welded with the Chicago Electric. And, you know, like I said, for the thinner material, man, it's not, it's just complete overkill to have a super expensive machine to do, like, you know, 1/8 inch steel or 1/4 inch steel. You just don't need it, honestly. So that's just my take on it. But anyways, that should help you out. As far as learning how to weld, there's plenty of stuff to learn, but like if you want to pick up and run with it, one thing I will say to do is make sure you have a lot of practice pieces laying around, and that is very important, especially when you're first starting to weld. If you're not going to go to school to do it like I did, then you need to at least study it online and make damn sure you know what you're doing before you just start welding on a trailer bed or a hitch for your truck or something. Because, man, if that weld fails, you know, you're seriously going to be you're going to be in some shit for that. So, you know, you got to be careful with it. And there's a lot to learn. It really is. There's a lot of nuances with welding. So, anyways, yeah, so that'd be my advice for you if you're going to start welding. I would start with flux core. The rest of it, you're kind of on your own, but that's my take. Okay, one thing I forgot to add that's pretty damn important, and there's just so much with welding, but I gotta tell you this. Big thing here, if you're gonna go into welding and you're gonna start wanting to use it on a normal basis, you need to have a 240. Yes, a machine will say that it can handle 120, and that'll be a selling point for a lot of people because they want to be able to use it off their home electrical and everything, and that's great. And you can use them that way. I used it that way when I first started out for years. But the problem with it is you're going to be very limited on what you can do with your machine. Tops, you're going to be able to do 1/8 inch thick material. If you want to do 1/4 inch, the only way you're going to be able to do that is to do multi-pass with it, because you're just not going to be able to generate enough amperage off of a 120 machine. So the biggest thing you're going to have to contend with this and decide if it's something you want to budget for is getting yourself a machine that has a dedicated plug for a 240. And not only a 240, but something that runs, like this runs at 8,000 running watts. And that's about the size I need, and able to be able to do everything here comfortably and get the best quality welds I can out of these machines. So that's something that I was like, man, I gotta mention this, because, you know, if you go get yourself a machine that say will weld 1/4 inch thick, but it's also a 120, and you think you're gonna hook it up to 120 and get that production out of that machine, you're just not. So you know, that's the caveat with it. So you got to have a 240 if you want to go thick. If you just want to go thin material like 14 gauge or even up to 1/8 inch, you can do it with the 120. I've done it. I did it for years. I've even welded up to 1/2 inch thick with a 120. But you got to do multi-pass, and it's just not very economical if you're going to be doing that a lot. All right, so here's an example of stick welding. So you can see I have this old tractor, and I have some teeth on my bucket. Now these teeth are railroad spikes,
and they work pretty well. I've had them on here for about 6 months, and I use it all the time. But this was all done with stick welding, and the reason is because it was a little bit dirtier metal. I'm using old rusty spikes, and they're also thicker. So I was able to use my 60, I actually use 6011 instead of 6010 because my machine's an inverter. That's a different subject. But yeah, so here's an example of where stick comes into play. They're not the prettiest welds, but stick's not really a pretty welding process in general, but it's not bad. So anyways, yeah, but you know, these have been on here that I haven't never broke off or anything. And I, you know, dig into the ground with them. So there's a good example of where you would use stick welding. A lot of the repairs on this tractor were done with stick. I didn't do them, but the guy who sold me this tractor was a welder, and you can tell because it's got all kinds of patchwork all over this machine. Though the canopy he put on here almost killed me. But it wasn't so much that his welds were bad, it was just a bad design in general. But anyways, I took that off, and a lot of the base plates that I'm using right here are from that old piece of steel that he had up there.